Hello, welcome to week 7. We're already at week 7. I know I kind of have the same reaction every week, but it's crazy. We have this week, week 8, and week 9, so 3 weeks left before semester 1 is over. And we are officially done with our argumentative and persuasive writing unit. We're going to wrap that up today with one last thing, and then we are going to jump into a brand new unit. So let me show you what we're doing today. And I want to let you know that our brand new unit it's just going to be this week and next week, and I think it's going to be fun. I'm trying to do my best to acknowledge that we're tired. It's almost the end of the semester. I know you're working really hard to get your grades to where you want it to be and catching up on late work or missing assignments. And I want to remind you also that I'm very proud of you and how hard you're working. And I know it's tough. It feels like crunch time right now. So please don't feel overwhelmed, at least in this class. Again, I can't control what happens in your other classes, but I really hope you are able to enjoy this little mini unit that we're going to go through because it's fun. So week 7. Here is our agenda for this week. You have 2 things to turn in. By the way, as we creep closer to the end of this semester, you're going to have less assignments to turn in. So this week will probably be the last week where you have an asynchronous activity. So this week we have these slides. I'm calling them Google Slides Week 7. You're going to turn those in at the end of the week. And then we have something called a POV photo walk. And I'll explain more of that at the end of this video. So first, we're going to do some wrap up and recap. I want you to truly take a second and think about how far you have come in the last 7 weeks of quarter 2, semester 1. At the very beginning of this quarter, we started this new unit, this argumentative writing unit, and you've come a long way. If you think back to where you started and what knowledge you had and what skills you had, you've learned so much. You've gained a lot of really, really valuable skills, and you should be very proud of yourself. So I just want you to take a moment and think about that because it's important and it's remarkable. And I know that with distance learning, it can just feel like you're not making progress, but I promise you, you are. Like I said, you've learned a lot. These are a lot of really, really dense topics and ideas and concepts that we've been talking about and learning about and interacting with different materials, and you have come such a long way. And so what I want you to do for me to put a last pin on this unit is tell me, writing it out, one thing that you learned in this unit that you found interesting, like, oh, that was really cool. Like, I didn't really know that before, and I think that's really interesting. And then one thing that you might still be confused about, because I've said this before, it's okay to wrap up a unit, to leave maybe even a class behind and still have questions, because we're not going to know everything. And especially this year, we did not have enough time to cover every single thing. So you might still have a question or something you're confused on, and I want you to tell me what that is. So go ahead and take 2 to 3 minutes, respond to these 2 prompts in your slide, and then continue on. All right, so I am excited. We are going to be doing short stories, and I want to preface by saying that a lot of times in school, but especially language arts, we kind of forget that when we're reading stories, when we're reading books, when we're watching something, but in real life, there's not always an assignment or homework that follows up with that. And so this is what we're going to do. We are going to interact with this story next week, but I'm going to read it to you this week because I want you to just simply enjoy it. It's a really good story. It's written by BJ Novak. You might know him as Ryan the Temp from The Office. He has a book pictured here full of short stories, which is the little unit we're going to be in for this week and next week. And they're really interesting. They're really funny. They're really creative. And so we're going to be reading one called Monster, the Roller Coaster. So I want you on your own to click on this link. It'll bring you to a Google Doc with his story in it. And I want you to read it. It's just a couple pages and just enjoy it. There's nothing that I want you to do yet with it. I just want you to read it. So go ahead and do that and then come back to this video. Okay, so again, we have done so much this semester, this school year. We started out in quarter 1 of the semester with poetry, and then with quarter 2, we've been looking at argumentative and persuasive writing, and now we are going to end with a very brief unit on short stories. And I have a question that I want you to think about. What purpose do short stories serve? This is a quote that I think would help answer that question if you didn't have a good idea yet. This is from Jennifer Gonzalez. She is a teacher and writer. She has a blog, and she says, with a well-told story, we can help a person see things in an entirely new way. We can forge new relationships and strengthen the ones we already have. We can change a law, inspire a movement, make people care fearlessly or fiercely about things they'd never given a passing thought to. This is important. This is the purpose of narrative writing in general, but short stories specifically, that it gives us a new way of seeing the world and people. And I think you'll find that specifically true with BJ Novak's story. So this is our goal for this unit. We have our 2 standards here. We're going to be looking at meanings of words and phrases, looking at word choice, trying to identify any type of connotative, figurative language meaning, and then looking at the author's purpose and perspective through all of these elements we're going to be looking at. For BJ's story specifically, we're going to look at what best symbolizes and or represents the experience of living life. And our learning target, I will be able to determine the author's point of view, perspective and purpose in the text by identifying the 8 elements of a story so that I can describe the rhetorical techniques the author used to create the text's purpose. So what I want you to do now is take a moment, pause this video, and in your slides, tell me what you know currently. I know some of these things are familiar, you've had them taught to you, and that's okay. I understand if you're kind of like, we've done this before, Ms. Albritton, but I want you to tell me, what do you know? Again, be honest. Don't go to Google and just copy and paste. If you don't know what symbolism is, tell me that. Say, I don't really know what it is. But do your best. Just tell me what you know about each of these 8 words, and then we're going to continue on. Okay, so that was for me. That last slide was for me to know kind of where you're at. This is going to be day 2 of our synchronous Zoom calls. So we're going to get into literary elements of narrative writing. But before that, I want you to take a moment to brainstorm a list of your favorite stories and characters. These could be from books, movies, shows, really whatever you're interested in and what you love, maybe graphic novels, comic books. They don't have to match, so you don't have to say Anakin Skywalker and Star Wars. It could just be, you can think of them as separate lists. So these are 2 examples from me, or a few examples from me. Some of my favorite characters, Anakin Skywalker as of recently, Pam Beesly from The Office, and then some favorite stories of mine. They're all 2 of them are movies. La La Land, About Time, and A Man Called Ove. So just think for a moment and write these in your little chart here. What characters do you love? Maybe it was a character you loved growing up. Maybe it's a current character. It could be non-fictional, but fictional is probably where we're looking at. So go ahead and take a moment, brainstorm, type those in your boxes, and then we'll keep going because we're going to refer back to this. So first, we're looking at 8 different literary elements. The first is character. Character is super important. It's probably one of the 2 most important aspects of any story. It can drive the plot, influence theme, and is integral. It is the heart, the beating pulse of any story. So if you look at this quote, your fiction, if you're writing fiction, can only be as successful as the characters who move it and move within it, whether they are drawn from life or are pure fantasy, and all fictional characters lie somewhere between those 2, We must find them to be interesting, we must find them believable, and we must care about what happens to them. Because if they're not interesting, if you don't think that they're believable and you don't care, then what's the point, right? So another quote to think about: why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to good characters? Bad things happen to good characters because our actions have consequences, and we do not all behave perfectly all the time. So thinking about this quote, and maybe possibly to some of the characters you came up with in the previous slide, I want you to think of characters from stories that you are familiar with who remind you of this quote. What is a really good character, maybe a good guy, a hero, and in their story they had something bad happen to them? Go ahead and think about that and give me as many examples as you can, at least one for sure, and write that down. Because this speaks to the fact that when you're reading a story, when you're reading a book, when you're watching a movie, a TV show, you need to be able to see characters that have faults and flaws because they're relatable. Human beings obviously are flawed and not perfect. And so if we're reading a story or watching a story, we need to see that reflected in the characters that we're watching, we're reading about. It's going to be what makes it easy to connect with them and empathize with them and relate to them. So this is huge. Literally, doesn't matter if it's like sci-fi, fantasy, or historical nonfiction. Your characters need to be relatable in some way. When you're looking at stories that are more kind of out there in terms of imagination, like sci-fi and fantasy, of course, like the Force does not exist in real life, and dragons and all those sorts of things, they're not realistic to reality, but it's the people themselves, the characters, what kind of traits, personalities, interests, and beliefs, what make them relatable and appealing, because they mimic real life in that sense. So continuation, we're looking at, okay, I get that, Miss Albritton, but how do I know who a character is? Like, what can I practically look for to understand a character and know who they are? First of all, you can look at dialogue. This is a quote from Anne Lamott. One line of dialogue that rings true reveals character in a way that pages of description can't. If you can figure out a way to have dialogue that is authentic and genuine and engaging, you're going to know a lot about your characters because, I mean, communication, right? It's a huge aspect of being human, or living. How are they described to look physically on the outside? That's kind of a no-brainer, but just thinking about what is their appearance. You can think about transference, that word that we learned about last unit, how there are specific choices being made based on, their hair color, their skin color, their eyes, the type of clothing that they wear. All those things are intentional and should be well thought out. Then also, what are their habits, their interests, their beliefs, their dislikes? What are they like as a person overall? The kind of aspects to them that make them who they are on the inside, if you will. And then lastly, what are their relationships like in terms of how they interact with family, friends, significant others? Do they tend to be more rude and aggressive, or are they calm or laid back? What kind of words would you describe their relationships and how they interact with other people? So we're going to give this a try, trying to think about some examples. So thinking about these bullet points and these ideas, we're going to try to describe two characters that most, if not all of you, should be familiar with. The first, I told you I have Star Wars on the brain, Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. How would we describe him? Think about dialogue first. We'll go down the line. How does he typically interact with other characters, other people in his life? If you think about his relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's usually pretty confident and haughty, even though Obi-Wan is his master, his mentor. So thinking about dialogue in that sense, it really shows that he's very confident about himself and his abilities, and he's not afraid to say that out loud. If we're looking physically, this is something to consider, especially when you're looking at a story that has a sequel or multiple books that follow, because he doesn't look like this in Attack of the Clones, does he? He looks different. His hair's short. He has the Padawan little hair thing. But we can see he's wearing dark colors, his Jedi cape thing. He's got his blue lightsaber. So how does he look? He has a scar on the right side of his face. Okay. Habits, interests, beliefs, dislikes. We know that he is very smart. He knows how to tinker with things from his childhood. He's a good pilot. He really, really cares for his mom. And ultimately that leads him to some pretty strong anger and hatred for people that are responsible for her death. So think about things like that. What is his attitude toward the Jedi Order in terms of their beliefs and being peacekeepers, not soldiers? What about relationships with family and others? This one is huge for Anakin's story. How does he treat Padme in Revenge of the Sith? How he transitions from being kind of more grounded in the wisdom and ways of the Jedi, and then being slowly tricked by Palpatine into falling to the dark side. How does he treat people in that transition? Okay, so those are a few examples. For those of you that are not Star Wars fans, but maybe still Disney fans, how about Ariel, Princess Ariel, the Little Mermaid? Again, you could think about dialogue. How does she speak to other people? Is she more formal? Is she more relaxed? Which in this case is very funny because she does not actually speak for a huge part of the movie, right? So dialogue sometimes is going to look more like body language and how you represent your emotions on the outside with your facial expressions, right? I didn't even think about this until after I put that in, so that's funny. How does she look on the outside? Well, there's a big change that happens, right? If she gets legs, she becomes human, not a mermaid anymore. What are her habits, interests, beliefs, and dislikes? We know she loves to look for things, little treasures from, the human world. She's very headstrong. She decides she knows what she wants, even if that means leaving her family behind. Okay. What relationships does she have? Well, she kind of has a little bit of conflict with her dad. Her dad's very protective, doesn't want her to run away, run off, do something scary. Okay. So you're got to be thinking about these things when you're looking at your characters. How can I understand them? This is how. Think about these aspects. All right, so we've got plot next. Plot is the second most important aspect in narrative writing in short stories because, first of all, without characters, you have no plot. But if you have characters and no plot, without plot, you have no narrative. There has to be something that happens. That's the point of a story once you have characters established. So I want you to think for a second. We know that plot is important overall, but looking at our plot diagram here, exposition, rising action, you've seen this before. Just think, remember, not right or wrong, I just want you to think, what is the most important part of a story's plot out of these options? Go ahead and think about that and write your answer right here. Now, I told you not to worry about right or wrong answers, and I'm sticking with that, but I want to point your attention to a specific spot. Climax. It is obviously far above anything else that happens in the plot. And another way that you could think about the climax of a story is conflict. If you do not have conflict, some sort of issue, problem that needs to be solved in a story, you have a story, but it's terrible. If you don't have some sort of conflict, some sort of journey that the main person needs to go on, then you're just kind of watching a documentary about an average day in their life. Stories, trust me, think about it. Any story that you've ever read, seen, watched, there's always conflict. There always has to be a point of climax where there's been this issue that's been bubbling to the surface and it's finally come about, and now the main character has to do something about it. So though I did ask you for your perspective on what is the most important, I don't want you to feel embarrassed or ashamed if you picked something else, because this is something that we have to consider and remember. So a few notes about plot. The development of relationship creates plot. If characters are super vital and important to a story, the way that those characters interact with each other is also very important. So as relationships with different characters are developing, the plot is going to keep moving forward. If you can find out what each character cares about most in the world, then you will have discovered what's at stake. If you think about like Anakin and Ariel are two examples from the last slide. Anakin cares about a couple things. He cares about, to be honest, becoming the most powerful Jedi ever. He cares about avenging his mother's death. He cares about Padme a great deal and risks a lot because of his love for her. So there's several things. Ariel, she cares about not being held back to just being a mermaid and living life in the ocean. She wants to be on the sand where the people are, right? So find out what they care about most, and you will figure out what is at stake, what might possibly be the climax, the conflict in that story. If a plot has no movement, it's going to be extremely dull. There has to be some sort of setup, build-up, and payoff. You can think about that in terms of a joke that you would tell. You give some background information to that joke, you're building up, and then all of a sudden you actually tell the punchline to the joke, and that's the payoff. Similar to plot. If you're not having any movement, your plot is pretty much dead in the water. If someone isn't changed, then what was the point of your story? If you get to the very end, to this resolution, or if you even get to the falling action and you have no change in your character's personality, their beliefs, even the way they look on the outside, if there isn't some sort of change, your story was pointless and the plot was not working for you. If you think about, especially when you're looking at stories that involve like the hero's journey, there has to be some sort of change that comes out of whatever experience they go through, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. The story is pointless, okay? So the last thing I want to say about plot is there is a way that you could think, another way to think about this diagram here that might be helpful when you're maybe trying to write your own story, if that's something you ever pursue. A is action, B background, D development, C climax, and E ending. So an acronym, if you will. All right. The third one, setting. Setting is a bit more obvious. This one we'll probably go through a little quicker, but setting helps define a story's dimensions. It grounds the story in place. If you don't have a sense of where you're at, what time it is, what time period, you're going to be very confused. And if you're the writer, in this case, you're going to lose your readers. They're going to get lost and confused and kind of frustrated. So there's two things to think about: more big picture, time period, weather, time of day, colors, music, things that kind of set the scenes, if you will. And then the flip side of that coin is it's the details. If you look at this quote from Anne Lamott, I'm quoting her a lot this week. Every room is about a memory. Every room gives us layers of information about our past, present, who we are, our shrines, quirks and hopes, sorrows, our attempts to prove that we exist and are more or less okay. If you're looking at each of these pictures, you're going to notice some details for each one. So take a second, look at those. And think about what you see. What are the details? I'm sure you can think about what movies these are from, what stories. So setting, super important. And then lastly today we have It's kind of a double. POV, point of view, and perspective. So if we're looking at the difference between these two, it's this. It's similar to our argument and persuasion. They're different, but they're connected. Point of view focuses on the type of narrator used to tell the story. So that would be, first person, second person, third person. If I were to say, I went to the store, first person. She went to the store, that's third person. Second person we don't use a whole lot. And then perspective focuses on how this narrator perceives what's happening within the story. So not only do we have first, second, and third person needs to be established with point of view. Point of view is also going to determine who the character is. Who are you viewing the story from? So I think I used this example in the past. If we're watching The Office and the story is told from only Michael's point of view, that's going to be different than Jim's point of view, which in turn changes the perspective, because perspective is all on how they're reacting to what's happening to them in the story. So those are the differences. And here's a question that's going to lead us to our asynchronous activity. How would the story change if the POV and perspective changed? Let me show you what your assignment is for asynchronous, because you're going to be able to answer this question after doing it. So we're doing something called a POV photography walk. I call it a walk because I want you to try to get active and get out. If this is difficult for you, or maybe you don't have a camera, or your camera on your phone's not working, whatever the circumstances are, there's a way to go about that, and you can tell me if that's you and we'll talk through it. But this is the overall goal of this assignment. We want to see how perspective and POV changes what we see, how we feel or think about whatever the topic is. So this is what you're going to do. Our topic, I'm going to give you the topic. You're all going to follow this topic, is life. I know that seems vague and kind of big, but trust me. Your topic is life, and what you're going to do is you're going to either take or find one picture that represents and symbolizes life to you specifically. So when you submit, once you figure that out, you're going to submit your picture, and along with that, you're also going to need to tell me write a few sentences describing what your picture represents in terms of your take on life, because otherwise I'm not going to know what the heck's going on. So you need to have that description in there. And if you're struggling with figuring out what to do, here's a tip. Think about what life means to you. What is important in life? What is it like to experience it? What does it look like to you specifically? And that's it. I want to see your take on this. I want you to be creative. I'm honestly really not looking for a right or wrong answer. I just want you to think about the topic of life. What does that mean to you? What does that feel like? And I want you to find or take a picture that represents that. And you're going to submit it. So that is your assignment. If you have any questions, please email me. But other than that, that is our week 7 slides for synchronous days.